Without any further ado, let's go to Professor René Mayrhofer.
Thank you very much, Lars, for the nice introduction and for actually the kind invitation to give this keynote. In the name of full transparency, I am, like Vint, also affiliated with Google, but today I am actually wearing my metaphorical academic hat, and I'm not speaking for Google. So what is digital authentication and why is it important? When we think about authentication, what might come to mind is our laptop and desktop computers and our smartphones. Entering that PIN or password or using our fingerprint, face, iris, or other biometric authentication when we unlock the screen again is happening so often that it has already become second nature. But digital authentication is so much more these days. We are opening doors with NFC plastic cards or tokens and use RFID chips in passports. We pay wirelessly with NFC credit or debit cards, and we use digital tickets for public transport as part of our daily lives. All these are examples of digital authentication used to facilitate interactions in the physical world. The underlying principle is that all use cases rely on different so-called attributes like our fingerprint patterns, a valid phone contract, the permission to access a particular door, our account balances, or possession of a valid month or year pass for public transport. However, we never use all these attributes that describe aspects of our digital life at the same time. For entering an underground train, you shouldn't need to transmit your full name, place of residence, account details, or your apartment door keys. We pick and choose which aspects of ourselves we present in which situation. For example, by showing our driving license in a traffic check and using our registered SIM card for letting the phone log into the network, but not vice versa. When those different credentials are stored and used in digital form, we talk about digital identity as a set of all attributes belonging to an individual. Actors, who we also call verifiers, then receive, verify, and use those attributes for the intended interaction, for example, to open a door. Well, that sounds all nice and fancy, but what does it actually mean in practice? Right now, on the web or our smartphones with specific apps, we still tend to juggle with a multitude of independent accounts. Now, putting on my security lecturer hat, I of course have to repeat the mantra to use a unique and sufficiently strong password for each of them. Okay, end of public safety announcement. One big advantage of using distinct accounts for different use cases is that we can more easily separate the various aspects of our digital identity. We can use one account to shop, one account to communicate with friends and family, and yet another to communicate in the name of the organization we work for. However, I personally have slight difficulty remembering about 100 different passwords, some of which I only use about once a year for submitting my tax reports. A password manager and FIDO2 security token come in very handy to both improve usability and security by taking care of that problem of remembering passwords themselves, but those only tend to work in the digital domain. Physical world interactions that require authentication, like entering a building or crossing a country border, still require separate physical access cards and documents to be carried. That is one of the reasons why a rapidly expanding set of attributes and facets of our digital identity are already moving onto our mobile phones. We can use the phone itself as a second factor instead of a separate USB token. Unlock building doors and cars, pay wirelessly, and use transport ticket apps or more generalized mobile wallets. One such bridge between the physical world and physical world of interactions and the digital world of attributes is to enable these interactions, is to keep all of them on the single device that all of us seem to be physically carrying anywhere, anyways. The prevalence of apps and a mobile-first approach in the last 10 years has led to a proliferation of use cases. Many of these already use our phone number as a primary identifier. That is, as a single number holding together the different parts of our digital identity. Since this keynote explicitly has a focus on authentication without sacrificing privacy, I would argue that this is problematic. A single, relatively short and globally unique identifier is good for usability. We have learned over decades to read, write, and remember phone numbers. But a single, globally unique, and practically unchangeable identifier also makes it easy for third parties to link together the aspects of our identity that we may intentionally want to keep separate. Suddenly, your second authentication factor for your bank account or email login also needs to be passed to strangers to receive updates on your children's school closing times or car salespeople for registering your driving license. I don't mean the internet driving license here. And I'm explicitly ignoring the topic of SS7 and others related to phone number security. For now, I'd like to invest some time to talk about the privacy implications and what a smartphone-based digital identity can provide in terms of safeguards. A mobile driving license, the one for cars, not for the internet, combines a set of highly useful attributes and is issued by a government agency. For a traffic check conducted by police officers, all of those attributes are transferred and verified, including full name, date of birth, a face picture in high resolution, potentially a place of residence, other biometric features, and driving license specific attributes like vehicle classes and potential restrictions. When storing such a digitally signed blob of attributes on a license holder's smartphone, it can be transferred through wireless channels like NFC to a verifier phone, and the relevant attributes can be displayed there. As there are still some places on Earth that don't yet have solid network connectivity, including such truly exotic places like tunnels or parking garages, this should still work when either or both of the phones are offline. From a technical point of view, that alone poses a number of interesting challenges. If we also want the digital ID to be available when the holder's phone has run out of battery, it becomes even more interesting, but is still doable. Now, as the driving license is a widely available government-issued document, it is also used for many other scenarios outside its original purpose. However, for use cases like age verification, most of the included attributes are not actually necessary for the interaction. For entering a club or buying alcohol, it shouldn't be necessary to transmit your full name, place of residence, or the fact that you might be required to wear glasses to drive a car. Yet, handing over one's physical driving license to a bouncer or salesperson does exactly that. That's the first case where a digital version can provide much better privacy guarantees than the physical version of the ID. Selecting the age verification profile on the holder's device will only transfer the face picture and age, not even the full date of birth. In such a case, and nothing else is required. The verifier device can display cryptographically verified attributes for the particular interaction, but not store more than it should actually have. Another example is using public transport. Even when not linked to a name, and therefore sometimes called anonymous, location traces are highly sensitive data. From the places an individual visits during their days, it is often trivial to determine not only their place of residence and work, but also religious beliefs, illnesses, hobbies, and other particular preferences. If pseudonymous location traces are combined with public data from phone books and other sources, it is, in the majority of cases, easily possible to de-anonymize such individuals and link back to other parts of their identities. Transmitting a complete location trace to pay for the use of public transport with our smartphones therefore seems completely overblown and out of proportion. With a well-designed digital authentication system, that also isn't necessary. The only relevant attributes are the place of entry and exit, or for a particular journey, or even better yet, a proof of possession of a valid time-based ticket, such as a monthly subscription pass. To prevent linking multiple journeys together, it is important that verifiers in the domain of the Public Transport Agency don't receive any unique identifier as part of these transactions. Another more timely example is contact tracing for mitigating pandemic virus spread like the current SARS-CoV-2. In this case, the relevant attributes are that a contact has happened between pseudonymous person X for Y minutes on a day set, and nothing else. Only when an infection has been reported should that pseudonym be linked to an individual who has been part of that contact to warn them about the potential danger. I am extremely happy. Our ugly research prototype from 2017 is not what will be on people's phones. And none of the prototype cryptographic protocol and data format implementations will be either. However, some of the concepts and approaches to privacy protections will appear in a new implementation in Android 11 and allow generic use of this new identity credential architecture for much more than just mobile driving licenses. If secure hardware is available, it will be used for storing the key material and also for making the credential available when the phone's battery is too low to still power the main Android OS. But the story and my keynote is not over with the move of digital authentication to smartphones. While they are the current trend, they are still slightly inconvenient. We need to charge and carry those devices, and they tend to break, get lost, or stolen. We haven't moved all of our digital identity into the smartphone yet, but losing it during a trip in a foreign country is still a highly stressful event. Now imagine if your passport and everything else that's currently still in your wallet has moved into the phone as a single point of failure as well. Not a nice thought. If we look more into that interesting Pareto front that defines the usual trade-off between security, privacy, and usability, which includes availability, one technique that offers a different compromise is biometric authentication. Using various sensors, an individual's fingerprint, face, voice, iris, gait patterns, or many other biometric features can be used to identify that individual. The often portrayed vision is that we should be able to walk through the world without having to carry any physical keys, documents, or remember other forms of identification. What we don't have to carry can't be broken, lost, or stolen. On a more abstract level, biometric sensors identify individuals in the physical world, and verifiers, after successfully verifying their attributes in a digital world, enable their interactions. Put differently, sensors and verifiers distributed throughout the environment become the bridges between the physical and digital worlds instead of devices that individuals carry with them. When we look at current trends, we see this already happening. One example is the rise of voice assistants integrated into environments already, taking over some tasks that we previously performed on our personal smartphones. Under this assumption of biometric identification using sensors distributed in the physical world and operated by different organizations, there are different approaches to implementing such digital authentication. The obvious and technically simpler approach is the use of centralized databases. All biometric features and relevant identity attributes can be stored and linked. All sensors can feed measured attributes into that database, and all verifiers can simply query this database to find out if a particular individual has the required permission or attribute for an interaction. The Aadhaar system in India, with centralized biometric data of over 1.2 billion citizens, has been the largest example of this approach since 2016. Unfortunately, this centralized approach also carries massive risk. First, it easily enables centralized mass surveillance of a whole population when all uses of digital identity are handled in that single place. Who, where, how often uses which services? When all interactions are handled in a single system, only organizational and legal measures can mitigate abuse. It is worth noting that policies tend to change much more quickly than deployed technical standards and infrastructure. If you want to extend that mental picture of surveillance a bit further, think about what it would mean for digital identities in such a world to be manipulated up to the point of being censored. Disabling a digital identity would prevent an individual from partaking in most aspects of daily life. But this is a conference on computing, so let's leave political discussions for another time. Second, And in practice, even more important, centralized databases become a single attack vector with massive potential gain for attackers. Even small mistakes in the implementation or lost administrative access credentials can have disastrous consequences because of their scale. With 20 years in the field of computer security, I have no idea how we would possibly keep such a huge database perfectly secure. And neither seem most of the biggest organizations currently hosting such large databases in different domains. This overview is, of course, already out of date again and doesn't even include the various publicly reported breaches and leaks of the mentioned Aadhaar database, for example, impacting 125 million citizens in November 2017, or that social services could not be accessed simply because of connectivity issues in certain regions. And today's news, just about 4 or 5 hours old now, have told us about the end of Privacy Shield as international agreement for honoring data privacy regulations, because it turns out to actually be hard to unify legal systems of different countries in a single database. Now, one answer could simply be, this is too dangerous, so don't do it. After all, many of the science fiction books and movies that have been hypothesizing the vision of ubiquitous biometric identification, including the movie Minority Report that has already been discussed in Q&A earlier today, have done so in the form of a dystopia, of a warning of potential futures to avoid. Yet, there are so many opportunities that we should not debate if we would like our identity data to become digital or not. Because while we might have that debate, many others will already make it happen. Instead, we should try to influence how this is being done. We should design digital identity in a manner that supports its advantages, but prevents or at least minimizes and alleviates the dangers to security and privacy. For this reason, in the Christian Doppler Laboratory for Private Digital Authentication in the Physical World, started just this January 2020, we are starting to analyze, design, and prototype a system without central databases. Our main approach is to assign each individual a personal proxy, the so-called personal identity agent or PIA. This is a piece of active code that manages a person's identity attributes, but remains under the possession and control of that individual. It is more than a digital wallet to collect different data items, but it proactively tracks where an individual is and what they're doing, like a digital shadow. As the owner, we are able to decide where to execute this agent. It should run on a cloud server, hosting provider of your choice, on an embedded system in your own apartment, or while we are still carrying the smartphones in our own pockets. Moving that PIA from one host to another should be as simple as keeping multiple copies for better availability. Now, assuming a PIA to be assigned to an individual, we can form a clear interaction pattern. Sensors sample biometric features about individuals while they move through the physical world and send them to the responsive personal identity agent. That agent then decides which attributes from the stored digital identity should be sent to the appropriate verifier and which should not. After verifying that those attributes match the desired interaction, a physical world action such as opening a gate can take place, enabling that individual into complete circle to keep calm and carry on because no central instance gains access to all their interactions. Unfortunately, or maybe I should say fortunately for academic research, such a decentralized approach poses many interesting challenges. Not only do we have to design new protocols and standards for secure communication between these distributed parties, we also need to secure the various sensors spread throughout the environment or the new agents against abuse. Instead of the central database, the PIAs become primary targets for attacks and abuse of implementation errors. Finally, the attributes combining to form a digital identity need to be secured against outright forgery, modification, or other forms of tampering, such as combining otherwise correct attributes from identities of different individuals. The necessary cryptographic signatures need to fulfill two partially conflicting tasks. A, to be secure from the point of view of verifiers who will not necessarily trust the peer running somewhere under the control of a potentially dishonest individual, but also B, to avoid the use of unique identifiers that would be used to link different interactions of a single individual over time or between different verifiers. Classical asymmetric signatures do A but not B, because the same private key is used for all signatures and therefore becomes exactly such a unique identifier. I'd like to spend the last few minutes of my talk on a first analysis of the threat model for such a decentralized approach to digital authentication. The first threat class to discuss is denial of service. In many academic papers on securing communication, denial of service is explicitly out of scope because there are so many ways to cause it. This complexity, unfortunately, also holds for digital authentication scenarios. An attacker could simply cause network communication to break, to power off or otherwise make the PIA inaccessible, or to prevent physical contact between the individual and the sensor or to the verifier. Wind has done so much to make the internet robust and deal with failures, but losing access to a PIA would lead to a temporary or even permanent loss of digital identity and the access this entails. The second class of threats is misidentification. When an attacker can cause the communication between sensor and PIA or PIA and verifier to happen between the wrong entities or spoof the biometric features of an individual to an otherwise correctly functioning sensor, they could potentially misrepresent themselves as another individual. That would lead to a misuse of access to resources that this other individual legitimately has, and what is commonly called, if slightly incorrectly in practice, identity theft. The third class of threats is about privacy. That is, if the system works as expected in the sense of integrity and availability, attackers can still try to learn what individuals do, where, when, how, with whom, or even why. This is the hardest threat to tackle because there are so many points of attack. Verifiers could forward all the attributes they receive. Sensors could be manipulated to leak their measurements of raw biometric features to third parties. PIAs could be directly attacked to read from their storage or memory when an attacker controls the host platform. And last but not least, the fact that network communication happens between these three particular entities for an interaction: a sensor at physical location X, a verifier acting on physical location Y, and the network address of a particular PIA which represents a single individual state. It is often enough to become privacy invasive. We therefore need to look at all the layers of the communication, from IP at the provider level all the way up to verification of signatures on identity attributes to avoid the introduction of linkable identifiers on any of them. Onion routing techniques like Tor are one potential answer for the lower layers we are currently investigating in depth. And group signatures and zero knowledge proofs are potential techniques for avoiding unique identifiers at the upper layers. The interesting part is how to get them together. There are still many open questions. Our research lab has a funding period of up to 7 years, and I believe that we will need all that time to create a convincing proposal for a decentralized system. However, if we succeed, the impact of errors can also be drastically smaller compared to large centralized databases. Instead of controlling millions or billions of identities at one place, attackers would have to go after the individual sensors, verifiers, and PIAs. With my academic hat on, I can't tell yet whether we will be successful or if society at large will decide to use decentralized or centralized approaches. The recent public debate on contact tracing apps and the resulting choice of a decentralized architecture gives me additional hope. Nonetheless, the larger question of where to keep our manifold collection of digital attributes that together constitute our digital self remains open and challenging. By proposing a possible alternative to the technically obvious approach of putting everything in one place, we hope to enable a public civil society debate to even take place. But we'll need help. Let's work together to analyze the alternatives and then make an informed decision instead of blundering into the first choice that presents itself. With that, I'd be very happy to take questions either now or later through various, of course, digital channels. Thanks a lot for your attention.
For this very interesting presentation, which I can also imagine it will bring up questions, it will give information, it did give information, but also brings up new things and new areas to think about. So it must be puzzling for our viewers. One question already came in, and oh, several. I'm just looking at the screen now. If you have a question, please you can put it in the right side of the screen in the little box. It says polls or questions, and you can leave your question there. And at this time, we'll go to the first one. What happens if the proxy of a virtual ID of the person is compromised?
That is exactly one of the key questions. How do we make this secure enough to not become that prime target? I mean, one thing that already mitigates, I think, the attack vector is if you have many of them, and the task, or I would say our goal is not to create a single implementation that will be used by everybody, just hosted on different sites, but to just have a standard protocol, to have an open standard, and to have many different implementations of such personal identity agents, which already makes it harder to scale the attack compared to just going after one of the big, large databases, where finding a single mistake in the implementation of that large database is all you need, you're in. So just scaling it out in a decentralized way is one way to mitigate. The other is that, yes, about 1/4 of the project plan in our research lab is exactly on how to improve the state of the art in secure software engineering. We are looking at secure programming languages like Rust. We are looking into formal validation methods. We are looking into hardware security methods to tie together with the software side to make sure that the whole stack is as secure as we can make it. But of course, there won't be perfect security. We have to assume that implementation errors will happen, and we have to mitigate them.
Then this question also about control. I guess people are anxious about that. There's so much control in the state hands. The proposal here is to put the control in the hands of the user. Could you elaborate more on how user control over his privacy could be guaranteed?
So what we propose here is to not only have policies, not only have regulation and laws to guarantee privacy. I think the legal approach has been successful to a certain extent. In the last 2 years, we've had major advances in legal protections for data privacy. But as I mentioned, those policies can change. They depend on public debate. They depend on maybe just single events of terrorism to quickly change overnight. So what we're trying to build here is a technical infrastructure that intrinsically has some privacy guarantees built in, so that this point where all the attributes that make up a person's digital identity come together is really in their own control. It's their agent. They decide which of their digital IDs, the driving license, the passport, their monthly transport ticket pass, and so on, they want to unify maybe at one instance. They can choose to run multiple instances. Maybe they want to have multiple persona. One of them hosting the government issued IDs, the other one hosting the digital attributes that form their social networks. The others maybe be related to their hobbies. So if you want, you should be able to have multiple of those agents and split them around. Of course, that begs another very interesting question from a research point of view. How do you actually find the one instance that hosts your identity, or that part of your identity that you need to use currently? If I want to cross the country border to, let's say, Singapore, how does that border crossing verifier find out that my identity is actually hosted in my own home here in Austria? So that is one of the major issues, that service, a global yet private service discovery that we are tackling from the start. I don't have an answer to that yet, but it is certainly harder than just everybody using one central database and everybody knowing where to go to find the IDs.
It's adding up to that. Looking into recent issues in the US, how much more research is needed in the area of face recognition in terms of accuracy?
Another very good question. We have one student working on that particular topic for the last like 3 months because it is so timely. Small questions like how much worse does your standard off-the-shelf, state-of-the-art face recognition and first face detection, then face recognition algorithm actually get when you start wearing face masks? I can say it's still possible. You have to retrain your algorithms to only work with the upper part of your face. It still works, just not as well. I would still argue that face recognition, I believe, will not be accurate enough for quite a time to really identify one person out of, let's say, a database of hundreds of millions of faces, because there will remain to be too many false positives there. In our approach, we have a slightly easier assumption. We don't try to identify one out of hundreds of millions or even some billions of users. We just try to figure out if that face that just came out of that camera sensor matches the biometric template that was stored for that particular one person, for that individual that owns that personal identity agent. So instead of having to do a 1 out of n match, we only have to do a 1-to-1 comparison, which is a much easier problem, both for fingerprint matching, which also has the same problem of false positives, of collisions of those fingerprint matches, as well as for face authentication and other biometric measures.
So yeah, obviously I can imagine that it depends on the field of research of our viewers where you're in, just how much you get to do with these developments. Or would you say that no matter in which of the streams that we're having at this conference, which are a lot of different angles about computing, you should in the back of your mind take this with you?
Of course, everybody, especially in academia, egos are big. Everybody thinks that their own field of research is the most important and the others are not so much. So the obvious, easy answer would be yes, of course, this is very important to all of your subfields and you need that as the underpinnings of your work. That's the easy answer. I would still like to back what you said in the sense of please just keep it at the back of your mind. Think about it. Think of how it might apply to your own research. Be that AI, be that machine learning, in the sense of how can we better improve machine learning methods used for biometric authentication? How can we better improve ML methods for maybe estimating what that user is currently trying to do, where they currently are, which again is a probabilistic problem. But the reason why I would suggest that you keep thinking about digital identity and how to represent an identity. Is it really just a phone number? Is a person really reduced to one phone number, or is there more nuance to it? It's because it's going to happen. We might not like it. We might not like our digital lives to be, our daily lives to be digitized, but it's going to happen. And if we don't think about it, if we just let it happen, I'm not sure if we will head the direction that we want to. So that's one of the main reasons why we actually started this kind of research, because looking at certain trends in the past 5 years, some of us started to get just a little bit scared of where it's heading. And please keep that in mind. Maybe there's something that you can use from the field of digital identity. Maybe there's something that you can contribute to it. It doesn't have to be mainline, but it will just happen. I'm sure of that.
Yeah. So I'm just checking out the system if there are any more questions coming in, and I see no actual questions at this time. I hope that my screen is fully up and running. As we're going digital, we're experiencing some challenges as well, even though we're the computing conference. I also heard some feedback that somewhere in the middle we had some problems with your audio, but we can check it out to make sure that the on-demand version of this will be able maybe to create a better audio signal for that. As I'm seeing no other questions coming in right now at this moment, I think that we can thank you so much. Well, we can do that any other way because it was very interesting, and obviously, as I mentioned just after your keynote, it brings so much more new things to think about, and obviously we have so many talented researchers that I'm sure that they know what the next step will be for their field of research. Thank you so much for being with us, René Mayrhofer. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And as I have no audience to encourage to give you an applause, it's just me. But
thank you for having me.
yes, know that we appreciate it. Then now.